Chapter 5 begins with the letter that's sent to Victor by his cousin, Elizabeth. And the letter here, again, goes back to an idea of the power of words and conveying ideas through letter. Of course, in the day and age of Mary Shelley, that's how you would have gotten your information, is by courier, by letters, because they wouldn't have had anything yet, like a telegraph or telephone or internet or any of that. So they would have communicated over distance by letters. But Mary Shelley is very aware also of the power of the written word and how that is a concretization of ideas. In this sending of a letter to Victor by Elizabeth, we get an image of, first off, of Elizabeth's view of the world, but also of a new character here, as Justine Moritz, and we want to look at who that character is. Before we do, I do want to say a quick word just about the strangeness in the text of Victor's being able to recall with such clarity the letters that he has received, and this happens throughout the narrative. He's narrating something to Robert Walton, and in that narrative he was able to recall these letters with such clarity and accuracy that it almost bends the level of verisimilitude in the work. That being the case, we have to say either that Mary Shelley is not fully making the thing seem real enough, she's just not doing a good job with that, or else that Victor is making it up, or that Robert Walton is making it up. Remember that Robert Walton is conveying the story of Victor in a letter to his sister. So we've got the letter to his sister, and in that the narrative of Victor, and in the narrative of Victor, the letter that he receives here. There are layers upon layers here in this narrative. The character that we see then introduced by Elizabeth Lavenza in the letter is a character by the name of Justine Moritz. And this is the description of Justine. Justine was a great favorite of yours, and I recollect you once remarked that if you were in an ill humor, one glance from Justine could dissipate it, for the same reason that Ariosto gives concerning the beauty of Angelica. She looked so frank-hearted and happy. Justine was the most grateful little creature in the world. I do not mean that she made any professions. I never heard one pass her lips, but you could see by her eyes that she almost adored her protectress. Although her disposition was gay and in many respects inconsiderate, yet she paid the greatest attention to every gesture of my aunt. She thought her the model of all excellence, and endeavored to imitate her phraseology and manners, so that even now she often reminds me of her. According to the text, Justine is somebody who has been adopted by the family. Her own family has died, and she has been adopted by Victor's family, his mother, and is now almost considered part of the family, like a sister to them all. Although at the same time she's a sister, she's also quite beloved by Victor. Now it's the first time we've heard of her in the text, and yet Victor seems to indicate, or Elizabeth indicates, that Victor has before professed something akin to romance to Justine. And Justine also at the same time resembles the mother, so that there's a strange something going on here, which maybe Mary Shelley is putting us forth as part of the mania of Victor. He's a little bit like Norman Bates, perhaps, from Psycho by Alfred Hitchcock, that something's amiss in this happy little world of his attachments to various women. Throughout the story, his conception of women is askew, it's off. But Justine Moritz becomes a romantic figure for Victor at the same time that she also represents a remembrance or an image of his mother. The other thing to note here is what is said about William, the youngest in the family. Victor has two brothers. He has Ernest, who's I think 6 years younger than he is, and then there's little William. William's the youngest to the family. And William is described like a cherub, like a young angel. It says in the text, I wish you could see him. He is very tall of his age, with sweet laughing blue eyes, dark eyelashes, and curling hair. When he smiles, 2 little dimples appear on each cheek, which are rosy with health. He has already had 1 or 2 little wives, but Louisa Byron is his favorite, a pretty little girl of 5 years of age. Little William is himself darling and cute and angelic, but the statement that he's had little wives, although it's a little cute at the same time, indicates that he is something more than just a child, metaphorically. In some ways, William is like the youth of Victor. It's as though William represents everything that's young and naive and still untainted by the world in Victor. So when we hear of him in this letter, we hear of him being this happy, cherubic character. He is, in Victor, the remembrance of that world that's now lost since he has created this monster, this creature, this thing of nightmare. In his recovery, then, Victor begins to recover by the help of his friend Henry Clerval. Henry Clerval presents an opposite companion to Victor. Everything that Victor is not, Henry Clerval seems to embody. All that idealism and romantic view and the view of chivalry being necessary. Henry brings Victor back to health in a number of ways. He takes him outside to see the world. He tells him stories and tales, conversation, human companionship, but also he begins to introduce him to a different course of study. Victor himself has now said he has an antipathy towards all this natural science stuff. As he says himself, I had conceived a violent antipathy even to the name of natural philosophy. When I was otherwise quite restored to health, the sight of a chemical instrument would renew all the agony of my nervous symptoms. Henry saw this, and had removed all my apparatus from my view. He had also changed my apartment, for he perceived that I had acquired a dislike for the room which had previously been my laboratory. See, Henry recognizes that Victor has this relapse into the earlier stages of his sickness whenever he sees anything having to do with natural philosophy. Natural science is, for him, the cause of his dementia. Why? Because I think that's all a vision of the world as machine within a machine. When he sees the world as a machine within a machine, he begins to get gloomy and dark and despairing of life. And Clerval begins to call him out from that, to bring him back into a world of light. Clerval is a very different man, too, from Victor, where Victor is wanting to get at the heart of the mystery and to see natural sciences for what they are. Clerval is interested in language and the human story. It says here, languages were his principal study, and he sought by acquiring their elements to open a field of self-instruction on his return to Geneva. Persian, Arabic, and Hebrew gained his attention, after he had made himself perfectly master of Greek and Latin. Clerval's love of language and his love of culture and his love of artwork are what begin to bring Victor back to health. And when Victor goes out with Clerval into the world at large and sees the world, remember he's been confined all these months, almost for a few years, in his own little cell, his own little world, his own little claustrophobic world. He's like in a cave the whole time. And finally he's brought out into the world and he sees the world as beautiful. Even though he knows it's inanimate, he sees it as beautiful now that Clerval is bringing him back to health. He says, I became the same happy creature who a few years ago, loving and beloved by all, had no sorrow or care, when happy, inanimate nature had the power of bestowing on me the most delightful sensations. A serene sky and verdant fields filled me with ecstasy. The present season was indeed divine. The flowers of spring bloomed in the hedges, while those of summer were already in bud. That love of nature, of the outdoors, of growing things and of life, notice, is really something which is latched onto by the movement called the Romantic movement. The Romantics saw the world, the created world, as something to be delighted in and appreciated and admired. They saw it as something which gave life to us when we engage in it. And they, remember, were in contrast to that whole vision of the Enlightenment, that the world was a machine to be understood or to be manipulated or controlled. So here we have Mary Shelley describing this shift in Victor from the Enlightenment vision to a Romantic vision. And the Romantic vision makes him healthy and happy and able to live. The Enlightenment vision makes him diseased and sickly and almost on death's doorstep and creating visions of nightmare. Adding to this is also the creation of story, of myth, which Henry provides for Victor. Henry is a man who has great resources of mythology at his fingertips, and he's able to convey that to help Victor along. Victor says, the resources of Henry's mind on this occasion were truly astonishing. His conversation was full of imagination, and very often in imitation of the Persian and Arabic writers, he invented tales of wonderful fancy. At other times he repeated favorite poems, or drew me out arguments which he supported with great ingenuity. So what Henry provides is mythology to Victor. And mythology is the thing that begins to save Victor. I think it's a very profound statement she's making here. Because when one sees the world as a machine to be controlled or to get something out of it, we begin to atrophy. It's only when we begin to think about artwork and creativity and myth and see the world as a great myth, a great story, that we actually remain healthy and sane and not plagued by these awful monsters of nightmare.